No, I don't think they changed the time. I check when with big marker, and it says 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. I don't know. The problem is that I live in a country where we don't have 4 seasons, and therefore we don't change time. So that's why I rely on what Big Marker says. Okay. Has the time have changed already for winter? I don't know. Well, let's welcome everybody. The people who registered for this webinar, welcome to the second part of the series of webinars focused on critical writing. If you are registered for this webinar, you are going to receive the recording of it. So let's begin looking at this quote. Your first impression of that quote could be that there are that the word thinking is many times in that short quote. But as we have discussed in the previous webinar, critical thinking is the input of critical writing. You cannot perform the latter without the former. And this quote summarizes the essence of critical thinking. It emphasizes the metacognitive nature of critical thinking and also the fact that you can improve it and that it should be a goal for you. Okay, so that's why critical thinking is in our first slide today. Today's agenda makes evident that we believe in improving critical writing and that will provide you with some tools to do it. We absolutely believe in that you can improve your critical writing skills. So let's begin analyzing this definition of critical writing that we presented in the previous webinar. Okay? If you look at it, you will realize that this detailed definition illustrates how complex critical writing is. As you can see, it includes grammar and text elements like topic sentences, introductions, transitions, word choice, and also logical elements like interpretation, arguments, counter-arguments, evidence, thought-provoking ideas, etc. All these elements must be present when you write academic critical text. Of course, it is challenging. Goals are multiple and will be reflected in not only your work as a student, but in your professional performance and reputation. So mastering critical writing will have a lasting effect. And here you have the main reason for such lasting effect. You will get used to evaluate positions and evidence whenever you find an interesting idea, concept, or situation. You will ask to be convinced, and that will imply that you will analyze and make supported judgment. You will not believe without assessing. You will leave dogmas to religions and will not accept them outside that field. It will make you a scholar and a leader in your field because you will apply to your work what you require in other people's work. Then we arrived at the connection between critical thinking and writing. Writing emerges from thinking. Therefore, you need to think critically to write critically. And that implies that a piece of critical writing must reflect the three sources of critical thinking: ideas, situation, concepts on one side, values, beliefs, attitudes on another, and evidence on a third side, with reflection as the connecting matter. Now, I guess you may be asking the question in the slide: is it possible to have a clear picture of what to do to generate such a complex process? Many people have studied and written about that. After analyzing different approaches, I decided to present you the approach proposed by Plymouth University because of its clarity and pedagogical power. Let's see what they provide you with. Annalene, you say, so you need to read critical, to think critically, to write critically. Yeah, even though the first two, read critical and think critical, are two interchange that we are not sure when one begins and the other ends. They usually are performed in simultaneously. Of course, it seems to be that thinking is always before the other actions like reading and writing, but the more you practice these skills, the more interwoven they are, okay? So, but the idea is that you cannot perform writing or reading without thinking. So, let's see what Plymouth University offer you when trying to mastering critical writing. Here, critical thinking begins with a description of the topic, issue, problem, situation that interests you and goes beyond fact to analyze and evaluate them. Look at this model that has been proposed by this university. And so critical thinking includes description, analysis, and evaluation. And although it is conceived in a linear flow, the model also assumes there is some overlapping among the three stages as the curved lines try to reflect. And it is tied to what you are telling us, Annalene. When we talk about thinking, you cannot set compartments, very strict or very unmovable compartments. No, even though you can put it, like in this case, into a diagram which is somewhat linear, those processes that are related to thinking and producing based on thinking are always mixed in some way. And that's why the authors of this model decided to use these curved lines, so you can see that it's not just that you begin here and finish here, but in the process there are some things that are together, and we're going to see that too. So the main assumption of the model is that thinking critically is basically asking questions and answering them, provide evidence to support those answers. Okay, so they rely on questions, on critical questions. Instead of accepting at face value why they read or hear, critical thinkers look for evidence and for good reasons before believing something to be true. So let's see how asking questions leads you to critical thinking. The whole process begins with the description stage, in which you contextualize the topic, issue, problem, or situation that you are dealing with by means of getting background information. You need some input information in order to be ready to describe. Okay? The questions that provide you with such information begins with what, where, who, and when. What looks for characteristics, while where, who, and when set the background or the context. Look at examples of the question that help you contextualize the target of your critical thinking. So in this first stage, you try to understand and know the problem or the situation or the issue of on the concept better, and you ask this kind of questions in order to gather the input information that will help you write or understand, in fact, okay? But after having a clear description of what you are dealing with, it's time to analyze it in terms of the relationships between the parts and the whole, and also of establishing possible new situations and alternative responses that can be derived from the information you have. So you enter into another stage, which is a little more complex. In other words, you look for patterns and relationships and perform an in-depth study. Like Harry Potter and Dumbledore do when they use the pensieve. But in your case, the pensieve available is your mastering of the skills needed to perform the task of looking for relationships and foreseeing courses of action. In this state, you focus on asking how, why, and what if. How wonders about the way something works. Why moves to a more analytical territory, looking for reasons and explanations. What if move your thinking into a more evaluative field, because you have to think about implications and predictions, and that makes your answer be part analysis and part evaluation. And that's what I referred to when I told you that it's not a stiff model that goes from A to B, but that have some parts in which the task interrelate. When you have, when you have these combination, that proves that the model of critical thinking is not stiff as we may think. And in the slide, you have examples of the question that let you analyze what you are dealing with. So you can see you have questions that refer to how, but they, of course, they are focused on how something works, on the way that something works. Why looks for reasons and explanation. And what if is a very interesting question, because it takes you to foresee things and to look for other, for alternatives and to look for implications and that kind of thing. So we arrive at the evaluation stage in which you make conclusions, discuss implications, find solutions, and make recommendations. It sounds like the last two chapters of your dissertation, in fact. It is in this stage in which you assess instead of believing at face value. It's that part in which you say, okay, wait a minute. I cannot believe what you are saying or what you have written if you are, what you have written, since you are reading an article, for instance, you say, wait a minute, you have to convince me, and you need to provide me with strong evidence. And you look for how the evidence provided supports or not the claims made. It is in this stage in which you establish the actual meaning and significance of what you are dealing with. You look for applications, make recommendations, and arrive at conclusion. Asking questions with "so what?" and "what next?" you introduce values, meaning, and significance into the critical thinking process, and they lead you to consider and plan more specific actions. You present, welcome Erica, you present your independent thinking as a result of a complex process of description, analysis, and evaluation, which is triggered by critical questions. So you use critical questions to generate critical thinking. You should aim to address most of the present questions, but of course, not all of them are necessarily required, and they may be determined by the specific characteristics of what you are studying. So the nature of what you are studying will tell you what critical question you will actually need. Okay. So once you have the required input information, which you have gathered through the critical questions, you need to develop the arguments which will be the focus of your critical writing. Okay? Therefore, you need to remember that an argument is a statement or a set of them, instead of intended to convince people of something. Any argument has two main elements: a claim about something and the evidence that support it and make people believe in the validity and appropriateness of your claim. In other words, it's not enough to present a claim to convince people. You have to provide strong and valid evidence to make them think it is true. It's not, "Oh, it is true because I say so," or "because I believe it." No, it is true because the evidence says so, and that evidence has been obtained in an unbiased, systematic, and valid way which you can assess. That's what this part is about, is to convince people, presenting clear and strong arguments supported by valid evidence. And this is the part that you are expected to work with in your literature review and in the discussion of your findings, okay? So the process of writing critically begins with critical thinking to gather input information and continues with the development of the arguments you are going to write about. How can you do it? How can you go from description to analysis to evaluation and from there to a critical text? This is what we are going to focus on now, and to do that, we will continue relying on the work of Plymouth University. And the reason for do that is because Plymouth University created a very illustrative example of how to develop arguments and write critical text. It describes how, in this example, it describes how an anthropologist builds such a text answering critical questions. So the process begins asking critical questions for the description stage and then performing analysis on that information. Please pay attention to the slide on how description becomes analysis. check the relationships between both columns and note that there are answers that are still questions and require more work, mainly using previous research. You are losing connection. What about you, Erica? Are you okay, Erica? All fine on your side. So it must be something on your end, Annalene. Okay, is it okay now? Okay. If you look at both sides, your connection. Okay, if you look at both sides of this slide, you see how the anthropologist think about the finding of something and how that person tries to describe that object. And the first question, what is it? And it has an answer. And where was it? And it has an answer, which still have a question inside, a kind of doubt. Was it the kitchen or the dining room? Okay. Oh, here's an example from your study. Good. Then you have when we try to establish the moment, the historical moment in which this object was created, but it is still a kind of question for the anthropologist. And at the end, who used it? And there is another question. So that means that this person will need more information in order to do a more reliable description. But this goes into analysis when this person asks, what was its purpose? Well, could have been to contain liquid. How would it work? And it has a straight answer. But the first one doesn't. So that means that she needs to do something else. And why this shape, this size and shape? And why the handle? And then this person has to go to literature, has to go to previous research, and perhaps she can have this kind of explanation that can help her. And this is an example of a text that the anthropology may use to answer most of her questions to describe the finding, integrating previous research into hers. And this illustrates using academic tests to answer critical questions. So you are not expected to answer all the critical questions by your own, but you have to go to literature, to previous research, and integrate those findings to explain and to describe and explain yours. So here you go from description to analysis, and you rely on both your findings and the findings of other people. In these slides, you can see how to ask critical questions to perform the analysis stage, and then moving towards evaluation in order to build a convincing arguments. Okay. So you see how this question that are asked about how and why implies an analysis stage. There is still some questions that cannot be completed answered by the findings and the analysis performed by the anthropologist. So that takes us to the evaluation. And the evaluation asks question, what next? What should I do in order to answer the questions that are unanswered yet? And then you can ask, so what? And that implies that you need to evaluate the significance of the finding. And again, literature helps researchers. In this case, let's see, The anthropology may use a text like this to complete the necessary information to answer her question. So using literature to find evidence to support her view. Okay, so once the anthropologist has built her argument, the claim that she has found a piece of pottery made in the Roman period and the evidence to support it, she writes a piece of critical writing that reflects the stages of description, analysis, and evaluation, and that might look like this. If you read it carefully, you may be able to identify what sentences reflect each stage. But don't worry, that will be part of the exercises for this webinar, so you will have time to read the text and to perform that exercise or that task, okay? Let's continue. Because before you do that, I'm going to present you a set of steps you may follow to write a piece of critical writing like that one. So this is the part in which you will have a hint to help you develop that kind of writing. And let's check what steps are those. Okay, the first step is to define the purpose of the text. What do you want to write the text for? This step may seem too obvious, but experience, and I have a lot of that, shows that many students begin writing without establishing what they want to achieve, and that at the end results in rambling. So they begin to write and they go from one idea to another and then go back again, go back to the first idea and so on, and that's just rambling. The second, or the same happens with the second step. You have that you understand not only what you are studying, something that will emerge through your critical questions, but also that you understand the demands of the task you will do, how to write the text you expect to produce. So you need to know the demands of writing critical implies for you, that you have to perform critical thinking first, then that you have to plan when you are going to do, and so on. The third step is to generate critical questions and perform critical reading of sources, okay? So you use critical questions, and with them on your mind, you perform critical reading and look for input information. The next step is to build arguments. What do you want to say? What do you want to propose? What do you want to convince people of? So you need to build arguments, which in fact are claims and evidence, both things. Oh, I don't know why, because, you know, I have an internet connection that works at 200 megas per moment. I don't know. Is it okay now? No? Off, on and off. I don't know. I mean, according to this, according to the chart I have in front, it is a good connection. But, you know, we cannot rely completely on technology. So if you have missed, the weather on my side is very hot, very sunny. I don't know, but anything could be possible. So do you want me to begin with this slide again? Oh, it's raining on your side. On my side, is absolutely sunny, very, very hot, and very clear today. Okay, so we were saying that the next step is to build arguments, claims, and evidence to discuss in your paper. So you have to be sure what you want to say and what you want people to convince of. I can see the Annalyn had problem because she left, so she continues having problems. Okay. An outline or a concept map, you don't have to use only an outline, you can use a concept map, is the fifth step, since they help you organize your ideas and check if there are gaps of information before writing. Okay? Very frequently, the structure of introduction, body, and conclusion is helpful to develop your text, since it lets the ideas flow coherently. It doesn't mean that you have to exactly do an outline or a concept map, but you can use any way to organize your ideas before writing. Okay, and you are not also required to write an introduction, body, and conclusion, but it proves to be a very reliable structure for writing critically. And if you are not an expert, it is good to begin with something on which you can rely. So I really advise you to use that structure, introduction, body, and conclusion. And if you decide to use that structure, the first thing is to write an introduction that reflects the points mentioned in the slide. So you write down an introduction that begins with a sentence that attracts readers' attention. So the reader can, just from the beginning, the reader can know where you are going to. And you have to remember to provide a clear picture of the context that you are working with, and also you need to state just from the beginning what the main argument or your thesis statement is. Okay, so then the second step is to, the sixth step is to write down the body of your paper. The body of your text discusses your arguments in terms of claims, evidence, relationships, and possible courses of action. This is the part of your text in which you integrate literature and research into your work, and where acknowledging sources is a must. This is the part that readers will analyze and evaluate more carefully in order to know how convincing your arguments are. And finally, you work the conclusion of the text in which you focus on restating your claims and the validity of the provided evidence, and you also link your work with other works, stating its implications, significance, and applications, and making your recommendations. Following these steps, I want to emphasize the idea that you need to acknowledge other people's ideas, okay? And that's a very important part of writing critically and academic writing. You have to acknowledge the people who have produced some ideas. And remember that nearly, we can say that no ideas are so innovative that they are not to a certain extent rely on other people's idea, because that's what human knowledge is about, is to take other people's idea and build something new based on that. But don't forget to acknowledge that those people. So following these steps, you assure the coherence of text, something that is a must for academic writing. Of course, you can divert from any course of action. I mean, you are not obliged to follow these steps, but this is very advisable because if you are not an expert in language and not an expert on the field, you may cause some problems if you go just on your own, okay? So at least at the beginning, try to rely on something that has been proved more than once. So, as you can see, critical writing is not a mere description, and you are expected to perform actions like the ones described in the next slide that we saw last week, but that is good to remind you about them. And this table, taken from Cottrell 2008, gives you a clear picture of why describing is not what you are expected to do when asked to write critically. If you check the verbs used on that table, you will be able to infer the differences in complexity between describing and writing critically. Verbs like identify, evaluate, argue, show why, wait, etc., imply a process that begins with actions on a description, but expand to a new level by means of reflection, analysis, and evaluation. And this is the main idea of this webinar. The idea that it is true because I think it is not an option for academic writing. Remember that every time that you are writing an academic text, you are expected to convince. And to convince, you need not only claims, but evidence, valid evidence that people can evaluate and then say, okay, I believe in what you are saying. Or no, I don't believe in what you are saying because your evidence does not support what you are saying. So this is an idea that you have to put into your mind and use it every time that you work with academic text. And these are the ideas we developed today and that I hope I have presented successfully. Okay, so now you have your idea what critical writing is, how to generate critical thinking because it is the input for critical writing, how to develop an argument, and some steps that you can follow when writing critically, and the kind of actions that characterize critical writing, okay? And here you have some exercises for you to practice critical writing. You can work on pottery, and you can analyze the list of actions that characterize critical writing, which is in slide 24, and try to check which ones refers to analysis, which ones refer to evaluation, and which ones implies a combination of them, okay? That will help you to fully understand the differences between analysis and evaluation. And the more you know that, the more you will be able to use it in an appropriate way. And also, there is another exercise that is to follow the step to write a piece of critical writing using anything that you like, okay? And as with any skill, you need to practice it in order to improve it. I mean, if you want to master critical writing, you have to write critically. And the mastering work begin with understanding the concepts presented on them, and then practicing. There is no other way. And these are the references that we presented, that we use today, okay? And finally, these are the next events at Doctoral Net. And regarding the third one, yes, I can do that, Erica. Just send me your email. I'm going to give you mine. Regarding the third one, very soon, I don't know if tomorrow or at the beginning of next week, you are going to be able to fill up a form to register for one of those two groups, or both if you are interested in them. They don't have those names. I have renamed them. Instead of academic writing, it is going to, we're going to call it mastering academic writing. And instead of lingerers, it sounds a little, I don't know. For me, it sounds badly. I renamed that as the moving forward with thesis. I think that the title gives you a good idea of what the group work is about. We are going to begin on October the 24th, and we are going to work once per week till December the 13th, in which we say, hey, Merry Christmas for all of you, and you're going to send me some gift for Christmas. No, that's not true. Okay, so I'm going to finish the recording, and but I still be here if you want to ask any question. And of course, people who are listening to this recording can send me any question or can comment anything using the bulletin space at big marker if they want, okay? So stopping the recording. Okay. And now we are on our own. So, Erica,